So, a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which will present and discuss a sample of transnational and national approaches to defining and integrating digital competencies into the profiles of TVET educators. My name is Sarah Elson-Rogers, and I am UNEVOC's Programme Manager of the Innovation and Future of TVET project. Today's webinar will run for 90 minutes until 11:30. The topic will be introduced by Professor Glenda Crosling, and the webinar will be moderated by Professor Graham Atherton. Both are here today on behalf of Sunway University, Malaysia. Next slide, please, Aldrich. The presentations are split across two panels. The first panel will comprise two main presentations. The first will be of the European Union's DigComp and DigComp Edu competence frameworks. And secondly, the European Training Foundation's READY model, outlining the competence profiles for TVET educators. Many thanks to Rina Vuarikari and Anastasia Economou, who have joined us from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, and welcome also to Elena Beck and Jolian van Uden from the European Training Foundation. After the presentations, there will be 10 minutes for questions to the panel. Again, to remind you to post your questions in the chat, and the moderator will ask and direct them to a member of the panel. Next slide, please, Aldrich. The second panel will present three different national examples of digital competence frameworks for teachers and trainers. The examples are drawn from England, Australia, and Spain. And again, a warm welcome to Vicky Liogier, who is the National Head of EdTech and Digital Skills at the UK's Education and Training Foundation, and to Jane Schuler, who is an Associate at the National Centre for Vocational Education Research in Australia, and also to Patricia de la Fuente, who is Technical Advisor to the Spanish Ministry of Education's Institute of Technological Education and Training for Teachers and Trainers. Many thanks to you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. As with the first panel, we have allotted 10 minutes for questions, and please post them at any time during panel 2. Next slide, please. Before handing over to Glenda and Graham, I will just outline the purpose of this project for UNEVOC. Our objective is twofold: to identify and to present first how are digital skills and competencies defined for teachers and learners in TVET, and second, how are these definitions operationalised in policy and practice? These questions will be answered through two main outputs: an online repository and summary of digital competence frameworks being developed across the world, and a series of thought pieces on the implications of digitalisation for TVET policy and provision. So this is a good moment to hand over to Glenda and Graham, who will explain more. And welcome to today's webinar. Over to you, Glenda.
We cannot hear.
Glenda doesn't have a microphone on.
He does now, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I did begin by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, given the range of people that we have here today. So let me talk a little bit about the project, which is being operated through Sunway University in Malaysia, Graham, myself, and Associate Professor Angela Lee. It's premised on the notion of digital competence as necessary in today's world of industrial revolution 4.0, which, as we know, impacts on all societies and all people. And nothing exemplifies more poignantly the power and the importance of digital competence when we think about our experiences with the pandemic, which many of us are still experiencing. Digital competence is vital for our lives, and it's also important for citizens in terms of access and thus their equity in their society. And this includes in education, including TVET, where the mandate is to prepare students for the workforce. And of course, digital competency is a necessary part of this. So TVET educators thus need to include digital tools in their teaching in order to develop their students' digital skills. And underpinning all of this, as Sarah has pointed out, is the need to develop TVET educators' digital skills. So moving on to our project that we've undertaken, it actually did turn out to be quite complex, because many of you may be aware that there are many frameworks online, which we had to sift and sort through. Adding to this, the definition, as many of you may also be aware, of digital competence is also wide. It includes a number of verbs and actions to be undertaken. If we look at the UNESCO definition, the range is from access, to manage, to integrate, to communicate, evaluate, and finally to create, to create information. Probably we could go further than this too. At the same time, and sort of further impacting on this, is the notion of TVET education, where the range is also wide, from certificate level courses to advanced diplomas in areas such as engineering, indicating the diverse range of digital skills that are required and required in the workplace. So, but we have, through our project, identified a number of frameworks pertinent to TVET educators, and these will be housed on the UNESCO repository site. And just to briefly run through a few of these to give you a bit of a taste of some of our work and what will be on the site. At the more basic level, there's the Indonesian government's launch of National Digital Literacy Plan, which through podcasts and videos explains the importance of digital competence for society and education. It's available in Bahasa Indonesia and English, and I guess it fits into the notion of the attitudinal side of digital competence skills, in that it's giving a context and motivating learners. We also have in ASEAN reports that assert the importance of digital competence for the socio-economic development in ASEAN countries. The Bain and Co report, Advancing Towards ASEAN Digital Integration, identifies many points that are relevant to TVET educators, including digital connectivity and access, financial ecosystem, through to workforce transformation and a business ecosystem. The UNESCO ICT Competency Framework for Teachers looks more specifically at teachers and the major relevance of digital competence proficiency in teachers. And it also provides pedagogical activities which demonstrate and develop teachers' skill. The Australian Government Foundations for the Future, Foundation Skills for the Future, also focuses on teachers' digital competence development and is aligned with the Australian Core Skills Framework. The final one that I'll mention today is the DQ Institute in Singapore, the framework Leading Digital Education, Culture and Innovation. And probably the notion of culture and innovation gives you a hint as to the end of the spectrum, or the further away from the spectrum that it looks at. So it does look at digital competence in citizenship, in creativity, and in competitiveness. And it discusses indicators for the development of high-level digital intelligence. What is it, and what is it used for? Of course, it's just knowing how things work and being able to solve problems as they arise, separate from just learning particular skills. So we'll hear more about these frameworks in panel 1 and panel 2 in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda, and thank you, Sarah. So before we actually get into the body of today's event and we start, I'll hand it over to our different panels, just were to pick up again on the initiative. It's been an exciting piece of work we're developing here. Keen to emphasise what we're not doing. This isn't about designing new frameworks or bringing new models that are emerging from our research. Indeed, what we found is there are a range of very important and impactful models and frameworks that are in existence at the moment. I think the issue is, how can we bring those things together? How can we provide a space where those who wish to develop their own frameworks or wish to develop their own levels of digital competency amongst citizens, amongst professionals, across TIVA areas, a space where people can go to search, to look at frameworks, and to also look at discussion, look at some of the ideas emerging regarding digital competence. We shouldn't really think about this as not being a key issue for us moving forward. It's predicted that 1 billion people across the world need to reskill by 2030. And many of those people need to reskill in digital skills. And we do need different frameworks. I think we'll come out today, that debate will be about how many frameworks we do need. Those overarching transnational frameworks are important. We do also need to be aware of national context. As Glenda pointed out in her presentation there, we've identified a range of frameworks, some of which are very particular to national context, some of which can be broadly across different countries, but some of which are very much focused on the needs of particular groups and populations. At the moment, we've identified around 30 frameworks to initially populate the online reference point, which will be launched later this year. We'll come back to the next steps of the project at the end today. Of those particular frameworks, some of those, let's say, are done by transnational organisations, some are done by private sector organisations. Some of those are focused on citizens, some are focused on professionals. There is quite a focus on competency for those in education, teaching education across TIVA areas. There's a debate as well about, do we need more of such frameworks? Where's the interaction between them? At the end of the day, of course, these are all means to an end, which is to improve, of course, and develop the skills of those wishing to work across different TIVA areas. Of course, occupational specific frameworks, another area. Yeah, that's probably an area where there is room for further research and development. We really identified most of our frameworks were quite general, apart from those that, particularly in the teaching profession. So there is some work to think about in particular vocational areas. Do we need specific frameworks in there or not? So we've got, like any a good piece of research-based work, many questions emerge from what we've done, but at the same time, we are seeing a particular distinctive product emerging here. And it's not just today an opportunity to hear from our esteemed speakers, to learn more about the work they're doing in terms of the different models for developing competency and across digital and integrated to other broader areas of the teaching and learner development. But it's also about helping us think about how we can really utilise the investment that UNESCO and UNEVOC have put into this new initiative to try and enable those across the world to be able to develop their own particular work in this field. So that's kind of the overall background to the project. Let's get in now into the panel. So as Glenda and Sarah pointed out, we have two panel sessions today. First looks at transnational framework. So what are we seeing things that transcend different countries? We'll hear today about not just two different particular models, particularly about the READY model, which puts digital competence in a broader setting. That's very important because we can't think of it just as a set place on its own. And then we go into our national-led frameworks. We see examples from three particular different parts across the world. So first we'll go into our transnational digital competence frameworks. We have two speakers, as Sarah discussed today, two presentations. We have four colleagues who will also be involved in the chat. As Sarah pointed out, if you have questions, please put them in the chat throughout the presentation. We have only a small amount of time for questions, so don't think too much about putting them later on, or you won't be able to get your question in. So if you have questions, do put them in the chat as we go along. And it's very tight timed, but we're very confident that our speakers will be sticking to their 10 minutes because, of course, they know that they won't be coming at the end reminding them they only have 10 minutes to speak. But we'll go straight now into our first presentation. So, Rena, if you'd like to take us away, we'll tell us more about the work of Digicomp Edu, and we'll go straight over to Alina. So, Rena, thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
Perfect. Hello, everybody from Sevilla, Spain. I'm here at the Joint Research Center with my colleague, Anastasia. We will be talking about the frameworks that we have been developing here at the European Commission's Joint Research Center since last 10 years. The two examples are DCOMP, Digital Competence Framework for Citizens, and DCOMP Edu, Digital Competence Framework for Educators. I will first start by talking about the little bit legal status of these frameworks. So we are working at the European level, at the European Union level, and importantly to understand when we talk about implementing these tools is that European Union doesn't have any legislative powers in the field of education and training. We have so-called subsidiarity concept, and that means that European Union can only work in this area through methods of soft coordination, open methods, and they are things like voluntary cooperation and where we create common understanding of problems, and we use guidelines, indicators, benchmarking, and so on to overcome these problems. One of these tools is exactly a reference framework for competencies. Here, what you see is the definition of digital competence. Importantly, this comes from a council recommendation on key competencies for lifelong learning. This is an example of the type of open method soft coordination. Digital competence was already defined in 2018 as a critical, confident, and responsible use of and engagement with digital technologies for learning, at work, and for participation in society. And importantly, at the European context, when we talk about competencies, they are really a combination of knowledge, facts, skill, how to do something, and attitude. For example, open mind, explore, critical use, and so on. Next slide. So let me just show you quickly a few key features of these frameworks. Let's go to the next one. So what you see here is the conceptual reference model of the digital competence framework for citizens. So the idea is that we give a structure for this definition that was already set. And how we have structured this is that we have identified 5 key areas. You see them on the left: information and data literacy, communication and collaboration, digital content creation, safety, and problem solving. Each of these areas are further divided into competencies. Each competence, you can see it up there in the information and data literacy, for example, first one, browsing, searching, filtering data, information, and digital content. Furthermore, you see there only the title, but there would be the descriptor of this competence, which is a short, very precise description of what this competence entails. Next slide, please. And here you can see similar conceptual reference model for the digital competence framework for educators. You can see by different colors and numbering, you can see 6 areas. You can see on the left-hand side, number 1, professional engagement. 2nd, digital resources. 3rd, teaching and learning. So how exactly in this profession you put digital skills, digital tools into the core of your work. Learning, teaching, and assessment is the 3rd area. We also look at the teacher competencies, empowering learners. So here we talk about differentiation, personalization, how do you actively engage learners in the learning process. And the 6th area is really facilitating learners' digital competencies. So here it is, how do you pass on as an educator those digital competencies that we were talking about for citizens to learners also. As a key feature, it's important to understand that, so this what you saw there, they really identify and describe the key components of the reference models. So here we talk the areas and competencies. And additionally, we have different features that a little bit might differ from the DCOMP to DCOMP Edu framework. We have proficiency levels, we might have examples of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and these would be something that go really in details. Importantly, always at the descriptor level, when we talk about competencies, we do not define things very clearly. We talk about digital technologies, digital tools, digital environments, but when we go to examples of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, there we can name what are really those tools and so on. And these additional dimensions really can help better to guide curriculum development, guide syllabus development, planning, learning goals, learning outcomes, but also they are often used for self-assessment or assessment purposes, certification, and that is yet another work. Important for us at the European level is that these competence frameworks, they really create an overall and shared understanding. And in the case of DICCOMP, it is what digital competence is for citizens. Citizens meaning, of course, also learners, students, any citizen at the workplace, but also teachers as professionals. They should have to start with the basic digital competence, on top of which they have the professional competence. So the idea is, once we have this vision and we have vocabulary, the right vocabulary to talk about it, this really enables sharing good practices among member states. And that's yet another open soft coordination mechanism. At the EU level, we can't impose anything, but we can facilitate exchange of good practices. And this, for example, with competence frameworks is a really important part. And it's currently also becoming more important, talking to each other, sharing good hints, but also sharing resources. These also allow creating measurement and monitoring tools, and we can talk about that later. But importantly, in JRC, we always apply this strong scientific underpinning to all the competence frameworks. We look at a lot of existing work, a lot of consensus building with multiple stakeholders, and we also include the idea of updating and revising in our work. So how do we actually encourage uptake? So here's a few slides. What is important to understand first, if we talk, for example, about professionals, we have DICCOMP Edu as a competence framework, and then we have created a tool for teachers to use. This is an online tool called Selfie for Teachers. Anastasia will show a few things about Selfie for Teachers shortly. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Irina. So yes, indeed, the DICCOMP Edu framework is a conceptual
I think you've got 1 minute, guys. 1 minute to go, please.
Okay, very fast then. We use this conceptual framework to develop a more practical approach with relevant examples for the teachers to enable them and facilitate them in order to reflect on their digital competence and further develop it. So based on their feedback report that they receive from the tool, they design their own professional learning paths in order to develop these competences. And you will see here that in for teachers, we have 32 items responding to the 6 areas of the DICCOMP Edu, including as well some new items that they have to do with new pedagogies and trends, like for example, computational thinking, emerging technologies, blended learning, and so on. So in this process, the teachers will have to think from the more specific and more to more strategic and collective in order to understand how they can reach from a newcomer progression proficiency level to a pioneer one. So very briefly, pass back to Rina.
Thank you. And here we just end the slides, just as a reminder that these frameworks, they are really used in different levels. They are used in policy formulation, they are used for instructional planning, and they are used for assessment and certification. So thank you for the interest, and we'll be available for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rina and Anastasia. I think very important, as you point out there, the flexibility of the framework you produced there, enabling it to work at different levels. And that idea of a shared vocabulary, I think, was really important as well. That's something we can explore if the time of it is available in questions later on. But thank you very much, colleagues. We'll go straight over now to Alina for a ready model. It's quite a contrasting perspective here in how it positions digital competence. So, Elena, over to you.
Thank you very much. Graham, you asked how many frameworks do we need? I remember that question. So let me just say that we are presenting together with my colleague, Jolien van Ouden. We are a part of the Creating New Learning team of the ETF, and the Ready model was developed as a part of our work, because our objective is to support and identify different innovations in teaching and learning, and make sure that we make innovation a systemic feature of lifelong learning, which is a big agenda, but we are trying to make our contribution. And coming back to the frameworks and why we call Ready a model, let me just say that frameworks, as Rina and Anastasia were explaining on the example of DigComp and DigComp-Edu, they are the attempt to zoom into the details of key competences and in different specialized circumstances. So in one case, it would be the competences, key competences for all citizens in lifelong learning perspective. I hear someone. And in another context, somebody is speaking. Sorry, could you please mute the microphone?
Can we mute ourselves, please, colleagues? Or can people be muted? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe you could mute from the central point of command. Okay, so I continue. The frameworks are an attempt to zoom into the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. For key competence frameworks, the general frameworks, it's for all citizens in lifelong learning perspective. And for specialized frameworks like DigComp-Edu, Entrecomp-Edu, these are the frameworks which zoom into both teachers' competences as citizens and teacher competences as educators. So they combine both the knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed for being successful in life, for teachers as well. And also, without possessing these competences, teachers cannot really give an example for their learners. They cannot behave in the classroom the way that would inspire learners to acquire key competences. So also, in addition, teachers need to possess the professional qualifications to develop these key competences, to support the development of key competences for their learners. In our case, we also use the word reference for Ready, and Jolien, could you move please to the next slide? We use it for reference, but not call it framework, because we try to zoom out. We try to give a picture of, in broader context, of the what is the new role of teachers in modern world, given that learning is taking now in different places. New learning is happening in different places. New learning is also develops differently, because there is more emphasis on non-formal learning. There is more emphasis on new technologies, as we are discussing today. And also, we understand that learners need to be given more freedom, more flexibility, and learning has to become more personalized and differentiated. And so learners are in charge of their learning. That's why the teachers have to be different now, and their roles are totally different than 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
That's why
so we try to, I think somebody's still speaking, it's amazing. We were trying to give this picture in broader strokes, and we're trying to use it for the reference by saying these are the areas where we need to go to move if we want to be competent as teachers and if we want to inspire our learners. So it's not a qualification framework. It does not set the necessary professional competences for performing the teacher job. And it's not an instrument that could be used for appraising the success of acquiring learning outcomes by teachers in their own professional development. It's not also a picture of somebody who is a superman or superwoman. It's just the indication of what part of us has to be if we are modern 21st century educators. And I'm giving the floor to Jolien for presenting the tool, and I will paste the link into the chat, and then we will take some of your questions if we have time. Jolien, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Olena, and hello everyone. I might sometimes be looking to my other screen where I'm sharing the presentation, and I will share the model later on. I would like to briefly explain how we developed the model. The model is rooted in a literature review. You can see here that we had 2 rounds of desk research where we consulted a lot of literature to see, okay, this role of educators is changing. I think we all agree with that. But what are the important elements in this change to reflect like the emerging trends or elements that were already there in the educators' work? We speak about educators referring to everyone who professionally guides and facilitates learning. And we try to capture in the model these emerging areas, activities, and activities that already existed, but that get more emphasis. So we are not trying to cover everything an educator does. The different rounds of drafting the profile, what we then still call the profile, but that changed into a model. We had a consultation session in December last year, which resulted in the current ready model. I'm trying to move my slide, but yeah, yes, now it's going, I think. The current model consists of 6 + 1 domains of professional activity. And it's +1 to also be able to reflect the local context, as referred earlier before. We think like it's a model to get inspired, but you should be able to adapt it to your own local context, whether it's a country context, a specific school, or you as individual teacher, educator. Each of the domains consists of a number of professional practices. We have 22 in total. And for each of the practices, we have at least 1 descriptor, but often more, because you see we have 73 descriptors that illustrate how the practice can be implemented in real settings. And these descriptors are examples. They are not exhaustive. And we could add more, of course, but I think 73 is already a lot. We use a windmill to represent ready, and we use the windmill because we say like the domains and practices are equally important. They are interconnected, interrelated, and they sometimes overlap, but they also complement each other. You often need more domains and practices to be able to create a meaningful teaching and learning practice. It's also a windmill to show that the professional practices are dynamic and complex and are influenced by external factors like the wind with a windmill. We have organizations, different actors, the context in which you're acting. I'm aware of the limited time, so I would like to show you the model briefly, and especially where the digital competence sits in the model. I will stop sharing this screen. I think Olena already shared the link in the chat, but otherwise she will do that now, and I will.
I did, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Can you now see the model?
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, great. Because here you see the interactive model, and you see the 6 + 1 domains of professional activity. And I think not surprisingly, one of the domains is digital. We call it digital technologies because we are speaking about professional activities and not about competences. And you will see this shows how digital competences are integrated in the work of educators. It can be important to really focus on one of the areas to improve yourself, to improve a specific practice. But I think it often is also about combining different activities and different practices. If you go click on one of the domains, you get to this screen where you will see, like for each of the domains, and I now clicked on digital technologies, that you have the professional practices. So we have 4 here.
Could we get to a conclusion now, please? We have.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So yeah, so each of the digital technologies you see here, you can move into the descriptors where you get an example of each of the how do you say, the practices under each domain. And you will also see that you find digital not only in digital technologies, but for example, also in collaboration and engagement, and in other ones where you will see like face-to-face and or online. So digital is reflected throughout the framework. Just to conclude, we invite you to browse through the model. You can use it, you can adapt it because it's under Creative Commons. We would like to hear your experiences if you start using it. And if you have any questions, ask them in the chat, or you find on this page also our email address, so you can always contact us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolien, and thank you, Elena. And as you say, the information is there to find out more about the model. And I think you can see from Ready Model and from the EU Digicomp work, the level of work that's gone into developing these particular models and frameworks, the amount of consultation and research that's gone into developing them. But they are, of course, as Jolien and Elena emphasised, ongoing and living activities. So I'm sure that they will welcome your contribution to take these things forward. So now's the time for some discussion, and let's see what's available there in discussion there. So as we see there, one of the questions we raised you from the chat, this idea, of course, of context. So, of course, these two very transnational programs and models and frameworks you developed here. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit, maybe Rini and Anastasia, immediately about context? How are these working in particular contexts, and how are you managing the fact that you have a generic model that you want to apply in very different regional and country contexts? How is that working in the experience of Digicomp Edu at the moment?
Thank you. Yes, that's a very important question. And to start with, we are really talking about the reference framework. So this is something at the European level that you take in your own context and you work around, you adopt it and you adapt it, because that localization work is really important. We give sort of a frame. These are, in the case of DigComp, like 21 important competencies. But of course, at the country level, you might already have a reference framework. So you can then look, where do you have a matching and where do you have maybe area of gap? So that's why the being at the very high level sort of reference framework, where we don't, for example, talk about technologies by naming them. This is very important when we write the descriptors. We are sort of future-proofing these competence frameworks by using generic terms, digital technologies, digital environments. So then when you take it to your country context, you can name the tools that you think are important. Another thing is that we really, that's at the descriptors level. We really, to get there, we work with the big stakeholder groups who are using this, who are users of similar tools, or who are using our tools, who are developing different tools, and we work on consensus base a lot. So there is like a lot of discussions, a lot of ownership, this co-creation process. So that also creates the fact that we can stay at the very high sort of without the context level, and then the contextualization, localization work happens at the country level, regional level, or could be even institutional level.
And we can actually mention a few examples. I mean, you will hear later on the example of the Spanish Ministry of Education, where they used Edu, and they created the national strategy for the educators' digital competence. At the same time, actually last week, we had a workshop where we had a group, a network of experts, sharing using the Selfie for Teachers tool in the different contexts, not only in terms of geographical context or cultural context, but also in terms of the target group of users. And actually, already we have some use cases, as we call them, for implementing across Europe, but also beyond. For example, we had Israel that translated the tool in Hebrew, started using it already, Jordan, also in Arabic. And of course, we're in close collaboration with our colleagues here at Etf to see the use of the tool in the Western Balkans.
No, I think that's really important. I mean, when we were taking our research, I think what I was particularly interested in was the emerging evidence you had of the way in which EU Digicomp has been used and Selfie for Teachers have been used in different country and contexts. It's about different learners as well is really important as well, isn't it? Different groups of learners. It's not just geography, isn't it? It's different groups of learners. I think it's really important as well. Alina, perhaps you could share a little bit about how Ready Model is going forward in different contexts. I know you said something in the chat to Angela's question. Perhaps you could expand on that a little bit for us if you could.
Thank you. Actually, I will link my answer also to the question which was from Jude Godgrove. about the cross-validation. We mentioned, I also mentioned in the chat, and Jolene explained the process, how the model was developed, that we did a very rigorous literature review. And that means that we were coming out of the evidence-based research. And also, as you see, a ready model is a very new, very fresh instrument. So this was developed after the EU Competence Framework for Lifelong Learning was launched, even its second release, and also the specific competence frameworks like EntreComp, like DigComp, like LifeComp, and also the Council of Europe frameworks like RFCDC and the CEFR framework for languages. So we, of course, you can understand that we, I forgot to mention GreenComp, by the way, again, JRC. So we reviewed all these frameworks before coming up with the model. And we reviewed many more other instruments related to teacher, profiling teacher, or defining the teacher areas of development or teacher competence, etc. So it's all the basis. But the format that we used was different. So we did not create another framework. And I would like to say that there could be many frameworks and many more frameworks, depending on where you use them. Because for educators, for specialized purposes, frameworks which have a progression model behind them, learning outcomes, examples of actions, very detailed breakdown of knowledge, skills, and attitude, they are very relevant, because we were, for example, applying DigComp, EntreComp, and the RFCDC when designing national education standard in Ukraine, for instance. It was a big reform, so all these frameworks were very useful, and teachers appreciated the level of granulation of their design. But in terms of cross-validation should be done also in a meaningful way, because we are developing together with JRC some other instruments, for example, like the scaffold card deck, or we developed the teacher booster series of videos. All of them combine and merge the different instruments and different learning outcomes in order to take them globally, more comprehensively. We cannot have lessons, or we cannot have teacher activities that would be focusing on one competence only, because it would be overburden for the program and waste of time. And it's not possible in real life. Competencies are all mixed. So we have to all the time cross-validate, and we are creating these instruments. The number of instruments is not a problem. It's good to have more, but it's important to understand how to use each instrument. And ready model will not be used the way the competence frameworks are used. And neither the DigComp or DigComp Edu or ready should be taken for granted, because these are all arbitrary tools. They are all created by human beings based on certain level of abstractions. So it's kind of scientific hypothesis. And we take from them only the things which we need and which serve for our purpose. So each educator, each group, each team will look at them and say, okay, from this, we are inspired by this part, but in our context, we need more of this. And just to mention the country examples, we were approached by Israel at the very high level, National VET Council of Israel, and it involves both Amal and ORT vocational education network. They are huge networks with very competent teachers and very high level of teaching and learning. And they wanted to cooperate with us on the ready model in order to design their own profile of the 21st century educator for Israel, for VET, for VET networks, and maybe broader, and also for CPD, for continued professional development. So we are working with them hands-on. They did a lot of work already, analyzed their own context, applied the model, and now we are developing together with them the profile for the Israeli teacher of the 21st century. Then, when we finish this work jointly, we will feed back into the ready model and improve it further. There will be more country pilots, and every time it will be this multi-iterative process where we will be moving in spiral, going up and going broad, and trying to grasp all the different activities. We also have a big community of innovative educators, so all our tools are discussed, and they inspire learning and cooperation among educators there.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you. And thank you, Alina. Thank you, Julianne. Thank you, Anastasia. And thank you, Rina, for participating today. And I think your points, Alina, are very important about that flexibility and how people need to take their own elements of these frameworks and models and move them forward. Because there is that kind of, we're going into that idea that what you've produced is restrictive and is the only way of moving forward. I think it's very important you raise that point, Alina, that people will take from these things different elements, and they have to work in a particular context. So I think that there isn't no sense I see from your work in that they can't be done in particular contexts. It's that flexibility, it's the model concept is really important. Thank you very much, colleagues. We do have to move on now, I'm afraid, onto the next part of the session. I hope you can stay with us. And it moves us nicely onto that question of what happens in particular specific context. So now we're going to move on to our second panel. We'll look at national examples of digital competence frameworks. We move quickly around the world. We begin in the UK, we then move to Australia, then we move to Spain. So we have 3 particular presentations. I encourage you as well, colleagues, as colleagues have already done so, to place your questions in the chat through these presentations. So we get an opportunity to talk about these issues when we get to questions later on. Okay, we're going to go straight to Vicky, and then we'll on to Jane and on to Patricia. So Vicky, wonderful to see you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Graham. And I'm delighted to be here with you today. So I've just sharing my screen. I've put the link to the Jamboard in the chat. So if you want to access the Jamboard directly, feel free. I'm just going to minimize this. Here we go. So if there are any tweeters amongst you, you've got my handle just here. And if you talk about, if you post about the digital teaching professional framework, please use the hashtag DTPF. Thanks. Okay, so let's get going. What is the Education and Training Foundation? It's ETF, so we've got a slight sort of a synonym organization, but we are the national expert body for professional development and standards in further education and training in England. And if you're not sure what further education is about, it is the vocational education of England. And we are sector owned. So I'm going to talk about the digital teaching professional framework and how it does underpin the enhanced digital teaching platform. And I will conclude. So why develop a digital teaching professional framework? Well, the vocational sector in England is actually extremely complex with a wide range of subject areas and in industries. So it was really about sharing an understanding of what it means to embed new technologies in teaching, learning and assessment, and also offer educators a clear developmental pathways when it comes to EdTech, so that they could improve their capability in using new technologies to enhance the quality of teaching, learning and assessment, as well as, and most importantly, improve the learning experience and the learner's employability outcome. So this is a framework, and as you can see, it is structured across 7 competencies. It is structured on the teacher's journey, but it's not meant to be approached in a linear manner. It's very much an aspirational framework. And it has got 3 stages of performance. Exploring, which is aimed at those of us who don't know anything about EdTech. Adopting, for those of us who are already embedding some EdTech in our practice. And that's going to be most of us lately because of the pandemic. And the 3rd stage is yellow, it's leading, is very much aimed at those of us who are supporting others and very much able to critique what EdTech may be more suited for a given practice. Now, the development of the framework is a collaboration with JISC, and it builds from the 6 elements of digital capability from JISC, as well as the professional standards from the ETF, and we've got 20 that we hold on behalf of the sector, as well as the DIG-CompEdu, which was a big influence. However, the DIG-CompEdu is actually looking at the full cohort, the full spectrum of educators, while we've narrowed it down to the vocational area. And within the framework, we cross-reference systematically the 3 influences that we had. So if we look at the framework now, you will see that you can see here on the top right hand side how each of the frameworks have been cross-referenced. And in the appendix, you will find the reference to the frameworks as well as the SAMR model. Now, the SAMR model is an easy way to help educators understand how to embed new technologies within a learning activity and how to enhance it, substitute it and augment it, and then transform it by modifying approaches and literally redefining pedagogic approaches. So I recommend you to check this out. Now, the framework is different. It was launched in 2018 in November, and it is different because it's focusing on teaching and learning rather than simply applying digital skills. And it was developed in very close consultation with the sector, by the sector, and we've had 5 levels of consultation across in order to develop it. And finally, it is different because it's not just a framework that you pin on a wall. It actually represents the first block of a far broader and wider project. And it came live in 2019 at BET in January with the Enhanced Digital Teaching Platform. So what is the platform? Well, it has been designed to remove barriers to engagement and barriers to professional development of educators. It is a mobile-first platform, so it's adaptive and responsive to whatever device you access it from, totally free to access. You don't even need to sign up. We've adopted on the platform and the content of the platform a user-centered design process again, like we did, and it consists of 175 bite-sized learning modules of 5 minutes each, which are underpinned by the DTPF. They are all pedagogy focused and inclusion and accessibility are our kudos, and you'll see that it's very much lived through everything we do. And then we've built gamification across the 3 stages of performance, and we are now building and fostering communities of practice. So this is the homepage for the platform, and I'm going to literally show you on the platform what it looks like. So under EdTech, you've got here about the Digital Teaching Professional Framework. And this is an interactive version of the framework. So you can navigate through it by going through stages in an horizontal manner across all the competencies. So if I was to click on exploring, for instance, then I'm going to be able to navigate across the different 5 minutes modules covering that particular stage of performance. Alternatively, you can navigate through it going through accessibility for, let's say, a specific competency, and you'll go through modules at exploring stage, adopting stage, as well as leading stages. Finally, you can also navigate through it, obviously, as in an aspirational manner. So for instance, if I go for a search on vocational, then I'm going to be able to see vocational focused modules. And then you can finally navigate through it as a kind of snake and ladder around a theme, a progression theme. And we've got 7 that we've highlighted here, and you'll be able to find those under the menu, under EdTech and narrative progression pathways. If I show you one, this is one which is focused on addressing the knowledge agenda, and it's going to give an introduction, 4 modules in terms of the core frameworks, theory, pedagogic theories, and application of those theories in the classroom. And then we've built in across the framework a reflection. So critical reflection is an important part.
1 more minute, Vicky, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for reminding me, Graham. So reflection is an important part of what we do, and you can see here there's going to be a scaffold, and we've got awarded practice wall where we build that social learning and co-creation of design and pedagogic approaches where practitioners actually share what it is that they do. Now in the back end, we've got the management dashboard, which really support practitioners in strengthening their support framework. And finally, we've been awarded the EdTech 50 Award 2 years in a row as recognized as one of the best EdTech product in the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. Fascinating presentation. So much so I almost forgot to remind you to finish. But now, really, really good. I mean, I think, as you see, the way in which it's integrating into the broader set of digital learning opportunities, I think is really important as we talk about revisiting questions later on. Thank you, Vicky. So now we move over to Jane in Australia. So Jane, not quite sure what time of the evening it is for you out there, but I'm glad you managed to join us and we're still awake, etc. So Jane, over to you. I'll keep you up a bit longer. Here you go.
Thank you very much. Hello from Australia. Today I want to present an overview of the Digital Skills Pathways model and focus on its background, key features and activities. I only have 2 slides. So the Digital Skills Organisation is undertaking work to find the optimal mix of digital career pathways. And this is an initial step to describe and codify the digital skills sector in Australia, and to enable national skill priorities to be identified and actions to be taken. Now, this work is supported by the Department of Education, Skills and Employment, and it aims to improve the national VET qualifications across industry, occupation clusters, and the Australian Qualifications Framework. And it was identified as an immediate priority under the Heads of Agreement for Skills Reform to strengthen the training system and support Australia's economic recovery. Now, as part of this work, NCVR examined digital frameworks from all around the world to assess their relevance to the Australian context and also to inform the development of the Pathways model. The focus was on specialist roles in the digital sector. Now, just as a reference, the Pathways model refers to identifying the digital skills, competencies and proficiency levels related to different occupations or skill sets for a nation and its citizens to benefit, participate and contribute to the digital world economy. Now, the model provided the first stage in unifying the digital skills ecosystem in Australia and a foundation framework upon which to build. Now, if you have a look at the visual diagram at the moment, the skills pathway has 3 key features: digital domains, proficiency levels, and critical core skills. If we look at the diagram, there are 7 digital domains that are represented as segments in the wheel. And these are digital fluency, design, innovation, intelligence, transformation, technology, and digital security. And within each domain is associated digital skill clusters or skill sets. Now, of particular note is the inclusion of digital fluency as its own domain, digital innovation, which includes skill sets related to emerging technologies, entrepreneurship, and business innovation, digital intelligence in the purple, which includes data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning skill sets, and digital transformation with skill sets related to the integration and management of technological change. Now, there are also 3 proficiency levels as shown in the black ring, and these are digital literacy, digital fluency, and digital mastery. And at the center are the non-technical critical core skills, including critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and adaptability. Now, if I could have a look at the next slide, please. The model in practice is designed to be flexible and enable skill sets to be blended to create digital pathways that meet individual industry, training organisations and employee needs. So if we look at this example of machine learning, and in column 1 is a sample of the digital core skill clusters with descriptors in column 2. But these skill sets map to digital domains as in column 3. So if we look at business process improvement and maps to digital innovation, data engineering and machine learning to digital intelligence, and software development and design to digital technology. So these skill sets, stacked or blended together, travel through 3 digital domains, and this creates a digital skills pathway. And along with that are different proficiency levels and critical skills. Now, the Digital Skills Organisation is undertaking a range of activities to use and pilot this framework and to embed elements and definitions within it. And this includes the development of digital skills standards, a range of qualification trials, which includes working with industry and training organisations to focus on data analysts, digital literacy skills development required by individuals in industry and employers based on the Australian Digital Literacy Skills Framework, which is aligned with the Australian Core Skills Framework of levels 1 to 3, a digital fluency project, and testing the framework with employers through a Cremont project. And lastly, a recent collaboration with a National Apprenticeship Employers Network to pilot programs to better assess, integrate and fast track digital skills into their sector. Now, in summary, the Digital Skills Pathways model is designed to be agile, an inclusive, skills-based framework that is flexible, fit for purpose and future-proof. Thank you.
Jane, thank you very much. Coming in under time as well. It's fantastic. And very interesting examples at the end there, I think, of how the framework is being utilised across different occupational areas, different policy areas, areas of educational work as well. It might be useful to come back to some of those discussions in our discussion session later on, because I think clearly the frameworks is very impressive, as the other ones are, but I was interested to hear more about usage and what we're learning from that process as well. So on to our final presenter for this second panel. So over to you, Patricia. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in Spain. So Patricia, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Afternoon or evening. Before starting with the presentation, I would like to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to talk about the work carried out at Etfs in order to give birth to the current Spanish digital competence framework. First of all, let me say that there was another digital competence framework that preceded the current one. It was called at the initial stages the MCCDD, which stands for Spanish Common Digital Competence Framework for Teachers, and whose creation started in 2012 and finished in 2017. The MCCDD was officially published in the BOE, that is our official state gazette, in 2020, and it published the agreement of the Sectoral Education Conference on the reference framework for the digital competence of teachers. And the aforementioned agreement on the Sectoral Education Conference stated the following: the reference framework for the digital competence of teachers must be subject to continuous evolution and adaptation, and therefore it will undergo regular reviews. And what happened? That the changes are undergone by our society, which demanded an understanding and development of the skills required in the 21st century digital world, and above all, and more importantly, the outbreak of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic made it necessary to review the Spanish framework in order to adapt it to this new context. And to do so, it was deemed vital to align the new framework with a series of European and national initiatives. Among the European initiatives, we should mention, among others, the European Education Area and the Digital Education Action Plan. And as for the national initiatives, the most remarkable ones are the 50 measures included in the Agenda España Digital 2025 and the National Plan on Digital Competence. And let's now focus on the process that concluded with the publication of the current National Digital Competence Framework. The review and update of this framework was carried out by a committee within the Learning Technologies group, what we call the GTTA, coordinated by INTEF and made up of representatives of the Spanish Ministry of Education and VET, and as well as representatives of the different regional education departments. The current framework was sanctioned on the 19th January 2022, submitted to the Sectoral Education Conference, and officially published on the 16th of May 2022. Taking into account all the aforementioned information, it was decided that the new national framework would be based mainly on DIGCOM-EDU, because doing so offered several advantages. The first one, being part of a solid ecosystem formed by other two frameworks, DIGCOM and DIGCOM-org. The second advantage, making use of the different experiences carried out in other European countries, as well as of the research tools and the tools developed by the European Commission, such as Selfie and Selfie for Teachers. And the third advantage, facilitating the convergence with other European countries in this field, and thus facilitating the mutual recognition of qualifications. Of course, the adaptation of DIGCOM-EDU to the Spanish context and educational system involved a series of changes, mainly the following: an adaptation of DIGCOM-EDU to the Spanish legislation, mainly the organic law on education, the data protection legislation, and the legislation on child and youth protection. It was also necessary to carry out a review of the most commonly used linguistic terms and expressions in order to adapt them to the Spanish school and educational context. In the third place, in order to establish the progression model, some criteria were set in accordance with the professional development of teachers. That is to say, taking into account the functions attributed to teachers by Article 91 of our organic law on education. And the number and names of the different levels in the progression model that appear in DIGCOM-EDU were preserved. And last but not least, the indicators of achievement in the different levels of each and every of the competencies were defined. And now let's compare both frameworks. As in the case of DIGCOM-EDU, the current Spanish digital competence framework consists of 6 areas, which in turn are divided into 3 main blocks. The first block deals with the educator's professional competencies and comprises area 1 in both frameworks. The second block, the educator's pedagogic competencies, that comprises areas 2 to 5, and the third block, the learner's competencies, that comprises area 6. And as was said before, the Spanish framework preserved the progression model in DIGCOM-EDU. In both of them, we can see 6 proficiency levels, A1 to C2. And to conclude with this presentation, I would like to talk about a key difference between both frameworks with regard to competencies. The aforementioned adaptation of the framework to the Spanish context also implied a review of the names and descriptions. And as a result of this review, a new competence was created. Therefore, DIGCOM-EDU has 22 competencies, and the Spanish framework 23, because competence 2.3, managing, protecting, and sharing, was split in order to create a new competence here in area 1, professional engagement, and it is this one, 1.5, entitled personal data protection, privacy, security, and digital well-being. And this new competence takes into account the ethical and pedagogical risks that may arise from the use of digital technologies. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Patricia, thank you very much. And I think very interesting, very contrasting presentation there, because obviously you explained how you've used the DigiComp model, but adapted it to the Spanish context. Particularly interesting at the end, how you introduced a new competence you felt was very relevant to the needs of learners and others, and teachers and others across Spain. So now let's move into the element of discussion there. So looking at a chat now, let's see where we can start our discussion. So I think one of the first things to think about is what's been the feedback from educators at national level on these frameworks then? So obviously you develop them in consultation with others across the world. I'm quite interested in what feedback you've had from the work. So when you engage with others, what responses are you getting from this? And how does that help in terms of usage? So I'm interested in the question of usage. How many people are using the frameworks, etc. So Vicky, what is that relationship like in the UK? What feedback are you getting from others? I think you're mute. Mute. Thank you. No problem.
I think it's probably the thing that we've learned all, haven't we, about the mute. Okay,
exactly. Common issue. Always muting.
Yes, we have two ways of collecting feedback directly from our modules online. So when you complete a module, you can automatically rate it across a 5-star rating, and you can add a comment. We have had over 22,000 rating on our EdTech program, and over 6,000 rating on our Essential Digital Skills program. You can, at the bottom of the page, you also have an anonymous way of feeding back. We also run each year an evaluation program to make sure that the CPD is up to date, and we collect feedback from educators in a number of ways, focus groups, as well as surveys, to make sure it's still fit for purpose. Altogether, we've got an audience of over 15,000 educators registered on the platform. You don't have to register, and we have over 87,000 users altogether, with a reach of over 2,200 organizations, and just under 200 of those are registered to our management dashboard.
In terms of those educators at national level, Vicky, what's that relationship like in terms of other policy-related bodies, etc.? What sort of relationship do you have there in terms of the use of the frameworks, etc.?
Okay, so we work very closely with other associations in the further education sector. So for instance, when we developed the framework, we had an advisory group with representatives from each of the associations in the sector, so that they could speak and voice their membership concerns, needs and expectations. And similarly, when the enhanced digital teaching platform was developed and the content was developed, we adopted that user-centered design process, and we had again the same advisory group following up on the development, as well as a focus group, EdTech experts, pedagogues as key informers to help us, and surveys to make sure that each of the module was tested by educators, their feedback taken into consideration, and we adapted the content. So each time we test, we validate, we adapt, and then we roll out.
Thank you, Vicky. Jane, what's the situation in Australia there? I mean, obviously you mentioned in your presentation some of the national policy bodies you're working with, of course, the department as well. But what's the issue in terms of usage? What evidence you have there, and tell us a bit more about how the framework's being rolled out and used.
Right. Well, the model was developed in late 2021, so it's very new.
Very early, of course.
Very early, and just come up my screen. And a discussion paper was distributed in March 2022, so it is very early. But from when it was developed, there was a working party along with it as well, which had representatives from industry, from employers, from training organisations. And the feedback that's come back is, I would use the word embrace. They've actually embraced this. It's a very overarching model, but I think it's been embraced because, I mean, it's a very visual thing and you can understand it quite easily, and therefore it is quite easy to explain when you're trying to look at promoting it to other organisations. We've also had impact from the National Skills Commission. There's been integration with other frameworks like the Australian qualifications, the literacy frameworks. There's all been all these other considerations to try to embed looking at the future, what we actually need in it. And I think as well, it's been embraced too, because it's adaptable, it's agile, and it can overlay on various bodies and organisations and various needs. So it is a very flexible model. And just to add, there's a lot of collaboration going on as well. So any feedback that comes from that at any stage is both encouraged and will be looked at in time. So it's an ongoing development.
Thank you, Jane. Patricia, so what's the situation in Spain now? And obviously you're moving to a new framework now, as you emphasised in a new model, if you like, in your presentation. What's the situation in terms of your engagement with other national policymakers and educators? And also, what do we know about the evidence of the use of the previous framework, for instance, you could tell?
As you said before, it's a very recent framework, so we are still implementing it. So what we can say is that we have closely worked with the different autonomous regions here in Spain to create the framework, and now we are working on how to implement it because we need to reach an agreement. And this framework aims at the development of the digital competence of learners, teachers, and organizations. So what we can say is that at a learner's level, for example, the framework is related to the new curriculum established by the Organic Education Law. That includes 8 key competencies in line with the Council recommendation in from 2018 and the SDGs, and Competence 4 deals with the digital competence of learners. When it comes to teachers and trainers, the current guide guides teacher training, and now we are working under the Recovery and Resilience Facility at certifying the digital competence of 80% of Spanish teachers, which amounts to 560,000 people. So, and here at Intef, we are doing what we call mapping. We are mapping according to the new framework all the teaching resources we've got. To know which of the digital competencies, including the framework, they help to develop, and we are creating new materials. And as for educational organizations, the schools are developing their own school digital plans, which are a tool to favor and promote the use of digital technologies. And we don't have much feedback right now from teachers, but it's true that when we have carried out training sessions with different technical advisors from the different Spanish regions, and at first they saw it as an increase of their workload, but we showed them that this is a unique opportunity to certify and improve the digital competence of our learners and teachers, and little by little, we are working together and making good progress.
Thank you for that, Patricia, because I mean, obviously the question in the chat is around resistance, etc. I'd like to make that sort of broader question, really. I mean, obviously, you're all in different stages of development of the frameworks, but what do you see as the key challenges going forward now for your particular frameworks? What are the key issues, key challenges in terms of developing the breadth of the frameworks, their flexibility or usage, etc. What for you, Vicky? What's the big challenge for you now in the UK, do you think, taking this forward?
Well, the big challenge for us is to keep the framework up to date. So, for instance, over the last 2 years, we've discovered new pedagogic approaches with hybrid learning. Now, what I call hybrid learning is when you are delivering a session as an educator with learners coming from different spaces. Some will be face-to-face in the classroom or workshop with you, and others will join remotely. And it's about how do you ensure that you optimize the learning experience of both type of learners, and how can they sort of collaborate together and really add value to each other's learning experience. So that in itself is quite challenging. And as you can see with the DTPF, which is right behind me, in Competency B, we've got face-to-face learning, online learning, blended learning, but hybrid learning didn't exist in 2018. That concept didn't exist. And therefore, it's something that we are looking at developing. And that means once we've developed those competencies, they will underpin a new set of modules on the enhanced digital teaching platform. So that's one of the challenges, of course.
So maybe managing that development of the framework in that sense then, because once you develop hybrid learning, then you may have to review other aspects of the framework to ensure that you are integrating it across the whole framework, I'd imagine.
Well, we've just updated the 20 professional standards that we hold on the behalf of the vocational sector. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, the DTPF is cross-referenced to the professional standards, but those have just been updated. So the next step is to update the DTPF.
Sure. Jane, what about you? I mean, obviously, we discussed that you're in an early stage, really, obviously, and initial response has been very good. You said it's been embraced by those across sectors and etc. But what's the big challenges going to be, in your opinion, in the next 2 to 3 years, say, in the development of the framework and its move forward? For you?
I'll just give a very practical answer. I think the biggest challenge is time, because with the technology sector, the urgency for upskilling and the number of workers that we need to get ready for the future is now. So really, to get this into the standards to be built for the to streamline into different systems, I think it's time. It's a challenge, because we really need to fast track to get this up and running very shortly. Yeah.
To an extent, you think then, in terms of time, I mean, obviously development of frameworks and the consultative element of that takes time. Yet, of course, the economy, the needs of the economy and needs of employers and economic sectors, they tend to be fairly fast moving and immediate.
That's
so
right.
Perhaps there's always that tension, isn't there, between the need to be consultative and want to have something that has broad ownership. Yet at the same time, as others telling you, we need these skills now. So it's that kind of tension, you think, Jane, is the one that needs to be managed.
There is that tension, but there is, because there's a lot of collaboration going on with this is very employer-led, it's very industry-led. So, it's an ongoing, evolving thing, and it's building up its own momentum. And the ideal thing was, because we want it to be agile and flexible, that we can actually be responsive sooner than later. Yeah. Absolutely.
And do you see, I mean, there's a question about specific economic sectors. Do you see the framework being refined then for specific economic sectors as it evolves then? Do you think that's something that will happen?
Yes, it could be refined. It could be refined. But again, this is an overarching, and as things evolve and new technologies, if they come into play, the model can accommodate that as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, and Patricia, finally, what are the big challenges for you then? Obviously, it's a new model now. We moved on from 2017 to 2022 now. What's the big challenges in the next 2 or 3 years going forward for the framework in Spain, do you think?
Well, as I mentioned before, one of the main challenges is that the teachers see this as a bureaucratic procedure that might increase their workload. And to try to avoid this, from Intef, we have organized, as I mentioned also before, a series of training sessions, both theoretical training sessions for the technical advisors in the different autonomous regions, and they then update on the framework to the organizations and teachers, schools, etc. And they are theoretical and practical, and we talk to them about the structure, the contents, and the spirit of the framework. And we, as I also mentioned before, we present it as a unique chance to improve and or certify the digital competence of our teachers, learners, and organizations. Besides, there are some incentives that will be made available, since the level of digital competence of teachers will be surely taken into account in order to access the profession to become a teacher, or to get a transfer to another school, or even to access school governing bodies.
Definitely, I think you pointed out there, as well as the buy-in from those different stakeholders, particularly in terms of the regions and the federal nature of things in your country will be very important, because, as you say, it is that tension. I'm sure people want to upskill, but there is the time. It's time in different ways, isn't it? I think Jane pointed to the time in one particular context there, and you're pointing to time as well, Patricia, as a major challenge. Patricia, Jane, Vicky, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much as well for engaging in the chat. We're going to just have a few more words at the end to sum up for myself before I hand over to Sarah, and then actually before we do some thank yous as well to yourselves and previous presenters. But I guess, overall, what's the summing up then before I hand over to Sarah? I guess what we've seen from the 5 different presentations today is the need for flexibility, adaptability, but also the range of different frameworks that are available. This is a growing and live and dynamic field, which I think brings home the importance of the work that UNESCO-UNEVOC are doing here, to try and provide at least a place where people can actually navigate their way through these different dynamic and growing frameworks. I mean, as was pointed out in the last presentations, Vicky indicated things continue to change and grow, hybrid learning being one of the new ways in which we are adapting to the new situation, of course, post-pandemic, and that's what led us to understand different ways of learning and teaching. And I think that will, of course, have ramifications for the frameworks and models that we develop. So I think that dynamic, flexible, adaptable nature of things is really important. So necessarily, I think we will need that space. So what I'll do at the moment, I just want to finish, is just share a little screenshot of what we see as this online reference point looking like. Alongside, of course, this reference point where we see the searchable element, there'll also be a number of thought pieces on digital competence as well, and also links to broader thoughts and broader ideas on digital competence frameworks, and links as well to some of the models we've seen today. So it is providing, if you like, that space we can bring together this global discussion and debate in this area. So I'll just slightly share my screen a moment if I can, and just show you if a little bit, there we go, if we can see that there. On the beginning, it's just one quick slide there, you can quick see. This is the kind of thing we're looking at here. For the online reference point, we'll see framework titles down the left, descriptions, some brief information. Then when you click on description, you'll see a brief summary of that particular framework, but crucially important, a link to the full information available on that particular framework or model. Alongside this kind of searchable database, we'll also have, as I say, a number of stimulus pieces on elements of digital competence. For instance, what we mean by digital competence, digital divides. One issue we haven't spoke about too much today is the issue of which learners from which particular backgrounds were able to access some of the resources available. We know that there are large divides globally across the world in terms of ability to access digital resources, access data, etc. So that'll be a particularly important area to discuss. And of course, for UNESCO, hope that as this framework evolves, we'll be able to see it developing and bringing in more frameworks possibly into the future as we see new ones emerging, and also, of course, being up to date with the relevant issues and with more stimulus pieces, perhaps more areas for discussion. So that's just a brief example, and I'm Sarah can talk at the end a little bit. We hope to see that thing going live later in the year. What I'm doing now is just stop my share, hopefully, and bring that down if I can, and which it won't seem to do. There we go, thank you. And just finally, to thank all the presenters. And if you're out there, I know usually if we're all together, we thank them in a conventional way by a round of applause. But if you think about, in these days, we do that thing virtually if you can. But I thank all the presenters participating today and giving their time up. And also, of course, to Max and to others who've helped organise this event. And also to the team in some way, to Glenda and Angela for their work. And I'll hand over to Sarah to finish us off. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Graham. I just feel like I want to tell everybody to breathe. My goodness, what a tour de force this has been this morning. I realised pretty early on that we could have taken any one of these competence frameworks and had a whole webinar on it. But of course, you only become an expert on your webinar by the end. So I'd like to reiterate what Graham has said in terms of his thanks to all of the presenters today who have given so freely of their time to share with us their experiences. Thank you, Rena, Anastasia, Alina, Jolien, Vicky, Jane and Patricia. And before wrapping up, I have one more minute. I just want to say a few words as to how this project fits with UNEVOC's other work on digitalisation in TVET, which you can see on this slide. This project is one of 4, which will be presented online, hopefully most of them by the end of this month on UNEVOC's web pages. So in addition to the work on digital competence frameworks, we also have a small project to present the globally available trend data in digital skills development for TVET teachers and trainers. We have examples of promising practices to deliver training in digital skills, as well as training delivered digitally for TVET teachers and trainers. We also have created an online library of so-called toolkits designed to support TVET providers to assess their existing capacity and readiness for digitalisation, greening, inclusion, and a range of other themes important to TVET provision. And our EU representatives will be glad to know that we have selfie in our toolkits and properly accredited to the EU, not to UNESCO, as you've just seen in Graham's test slide there. And lastly, we have a small online project presenting open educational resources with links to OER platforms and to content. Each of the project pages presents information which includes data analysis, research publications, and short form articles, as Graham indicated, on certain angles related to digitalisation. Two of our recent publications are shown on this slide. Right, and the last slide, all I have left to do now is to thank you all for attending today. We hope you've enjoyed today's tour de force of a webinar and all the presentations. As you leave the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a 3-question evaluation. We encourage you to tick the boxes and to please stay in touch and keep checking back with UNEVOC's work. So wishing everybody an enjoyable Thursday, and thanks again. Bye-bye.